let's pile in then. The domestic season is over. We salivated over the top 14 final last weekend, and this week brought us what was, frankly, a much changed but exciting, certainly from the French rugby nerds' point of view. 15 taking on New Zealand down in Dunedin. First of it's a three-match series, isn't it? It's a
Yeah.
proper shootout. Um, and France, well, I was about to say France came out the victor. They didn't come out the victors, but they certainly came out in
Moral
ashes
victors.
ashes parlance from a couple of years ago. Certainly came out the moral victors. Did you get to catch most of this?
Yeah, I've watched it twice,
Twice.
albeit both times on my phone. Um, but yeah, I think on the weakened France thing, I would go so far as to say not a single player of that starting lineup is in a first choice France team. Fiku is the obvious one that people are like, oh, but what about Fiku? Well, Moefana was like player of the tournament in Six Nations, and who is the first choice 13? No one really knows. So it probably is Fiku
Yeah,
to be fair, but he was playing 12. So
yeah.
um, yeah, it was.
What were your initial thoughts?
Well, I think you and I were both fairly strong in our opinion that the chat around it being a weak France side was nonsense. It is a weakened, but it is not a weak France side. Those players are fantastically talented players. It was never going to be 60 points or whatever. We'll come on to next week. I'm not ruling that out next week, but I think for the first test, it was never going to be a huge margin of victory. And I personally am glad that the players that we hyped, that we really like, not like, oh, well done us, just like the players that we really like. There are, the players that we were excited to see step up did step up. And I think that was kind of my overriding thing. I'm glad there are a few more Atisog Bays welcomed into the Teo Atisogbe fan club. Um,
Unofficial.
the unofficial. I reckon he follows us on Instagram. I reckon one day we'll make it official.
The official, unofficial. Yeah, and I guess in terms of stat, you mentioned Atasogbe. He was, France didn't have loads of ball, but he was probably their brightest spark, wasn't he? When they
Yeah.
did. The main man again. He's had just the most incredible seasons. Michael Guillard. I
Yeah.
think we saw in that France 15 game against England. We only played a little bit at eight, but fundamentally it nailed down one of the three kind of second row jerseys in whatever order that Gautier had been rotating them in, starting on the bench. But to put in a performance like that as a pretty callow international number eight was remarkable. It was a real like old fashioned all action display.
Yeah.
Bloke was absolutely everywhere.
Yeah.
This sort of it feels to me almost getting to a point, yeah, admittedly, there's some very high quality players who'd have something to say about it, but sort of player that you just would look to find ways to get in the side regardless. He's
Yeah.
played eight, plays lock. I'd imagine therefore he could probably play six, push comes to shove. Yeah, he was absolutely outstanding. Um, and particularly from a defensive standpoint in a game where the All Blacks had the lion's share of the ball, Alexandre Fischer, who I think, as you rightly identified, was kind of a few years back almost seen as like well, if not next great hope, then maybe one of the next big leaders at an iconic club like Claremont, and perhaps hadn't quite got there, albeit he still was and is relatively young. He was fantastic,
Yeah.
just whacking everything. I thought France as a whole there, uh, their tight five, I don't think had the most influential game, but
No.
the back row in the tight exchanges, defensively in particular, was pretty. Yeah, I'm going to use it heroic at
I would
points. I
say,
thought.
so I'm looking at some stats here, and you never know how accurate these are. But I'm on the Gainline app,
Ooh.
which is actually a pretty good app. Fisher 19 tackles, Fabian Holland from New Zealand 17 tackles, Gaetan Barlow. I think he would be the one of the tight five, definitely had the best game.
Best game.
I would single him out as the best of the certainly starting tight five. Um, but yeah, Fisher, I feel like I've slept on him a little bit. Like I kind of had always looked out for him, and then he kind of disappeared because he had injuries and kind of never quite found that form. I was like, whatever happened to him? Like, is this a guy that I always used to like him? Like, I remember when we went to Stade Marcel Michelin all those years ago. He would have been in that team, and I feel like he was brilliant in that game. And he's now going off to Bayonne, so what a signing that is. But
Yeah.
just he came into it the more and more the game went on, which I think is that's a real good quality to have. Like I really like to see that in a player. Um, Tisa on 12 tackles, so yeah, pretty good. I think he obviously had a little bit more time off the field than the other two, but I
And
think the tackling it was physical and it was like stopping them dead, which I think is
yeah.
pretty impressive. And so one thing you're pretty big on and you flagged as a concern, just defensively. Sorry if you wanted to go more on the forwards, but you're quite big on kind of defending in the 13 channel, and it's definitely something you always pay attention to. I feel like you planted a seed in my head of like Gaeton. We don't know if he's going to be good or bad in defensively. What did you make of the defending generally and like yeah, France's defense? Are you impressed? Are you concerned? Are you?
Little bit of both. I think
I think that's where I'm at.
I think to carry out the point on Gaiton, I don't doubt how quality he is and will be because he's still, he's still learning, particularly at international level. The point I was kind of WhatsApping with you was that it is so difficult and it's increasingly like the kind of fulcrum, isn't it, of the defensive line. We've seen teams when it goes wrong, it's tricky, and particularly in untested combinations. I think ultimately, and I don't think this is in any way just on Emilien and Gaetan, I think some of their backline midfield defence, I mean, frankly, they got torn apart a lot,
There were
which
a couple of times where they looked.
it was like,
People are facing in all sorts of directions, aren't they? Like,
I mean, you look at New Zealand for particularly the Villiers try. I mean, they're kind of backpedaling, but it's like two standard little shifts down the line, and
yeah,
there's a hole the size of like a cabin to run into. So they're not, they're not unique in that. But I think I looked, and obviously stats can be a little bit deceiving at times. But New Zealand had 13 line breaks,
wow.
which is I think more than the Lions had when they beat like Queensland Reds fifth 15. And I think some of that is maybe just a little bit of disorganisation, new combinations. I think a bit of it actually, some of New Zealand's up until the point they got into the French 22 and were either repelled or lost all composure. Some of their kind of midfield running and attacking was pretty exceptional. And what was it? Roy Guard at 9 was absolutely immense, I thought. So yeah, I don't know if I'm worried about the defense, but to the point you made at the top there, like their three tries ruled out. The
Yeah,
last half an hour was about as one-sided as I can remember in big swathes, and they'll
and the
just
second half, the first half.
yeah, yeah, they'll have to be better.
Got to get better.
But
I wonder if
I don't
it's
know. That's just on Guy Thon.
I know, and I wonder if actually it is part of. They mentioned like the third defender flying up at some point, and I don't know enough about defensive. I don't know enough about rugby, let alone defensive shape, to kind of comment on how they've gone about it. But I wonder if it is partly just a type of defense that Sean Edwards is employing that is a bit hair and scare and get up in their faces, who cares, and just cause a bit of chaos. And I wonder if it was partly that. They did miss a lot of tackles. They made 218, I think, but it was also
Wow.
like 28 missed, which is never. And they always used to say this about like Saracens and Owen Farrell or whatever. Like the missed tackles is can be a bit of a misnomer. It's kind of the end results, like the line breaks and the tries conceded and stuff like that. That's the big thing. But yeah, there, I think you were right to kind of flag it as a concern. I think it might improve. I wonder if they've got about five different outside centres available, so I wonder if they will change it up. But
Yeah, I've got to say as well, on a couple of years ago or last year when England were trying to employ this like blitz defense, it was all anybody spoke about on
yeah,
on commentary on TV,
and they
without
were getting torn to shreds.
yeah, it was a total disaster. But you could very clearly see what they're trying to do, and almost probably gave them a bit of leeway, I guess. I think from a spectator's point of view, actually, unless it's something as aggressive as that blitz defense was, it can be very difficult as I'd say, I'm not a coach, never have been, never will be, or played anything proper. So it can be quite hard to really know like what that defensive system is and whether it's just those guys are new, so they haven't quite clicked, or there's a few individual errors, or if there is some sort of new system they're looking at or maybe trialing on this tour. Um, but yeah, certainly their scramble defense and on the line stuff was pretty pretty serious.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that you flagged, and I think is still a concern, which might have played into that, is the lack of jackal threat, and I think that kind of came or bore fruit came to pass. Um, like when I mean Villiers is a very good jackler, but when he's your kind of when you're looking across the side, and you're like, he's probably the second best person at the breakdown in the 15. Arguably the best ahead of Fisher, but like that was kind of what happened. He won the early penalty, but I wonder if because they didn't have guys in the tight five going at the breakdown quite like that, that possibly kind of meant that they were kind of backpedaling a lot more than they needed to. Like if they had I don't know, like a Booger if he comes on, or I don't know, like someone like a Danny Priso
Mm.
or even like a Miafu who's like pretty good. Like there are players in the type five that they could have that are really good over the ball. Like Julian Marchand, like is
Yeah,
one of the
it's
best in the world, isn't he? Like
not just France more broadly, but it's pretty unusual, I think, in any and it looked this way to me from the outset. Any kind of first rate um, or tier, whatever you want to use, whatever phrase you want to use for a pack to have so few obvious jackal threats,
yeah,
given how like just an enormous point and talking point it is for sides and certainly the top sides. It's really stood out, and I think you're right. It just meant that those, whilst they were really excellent at being able to kind of hold momentum in their 22 on the gain line just through force and hitting and real kind of doggedness. I can remember like maybe one time I remember Villiers gets in there, doesn't he? I think early in the second half as well and poaches one
yeah.
on the try line. But other than that, it was you couldn't really see where that was coming from.
I saw a thing on X which I quite liked of like star ratings as a very kind of like rather than doing like player ratings, just like who are the top line. So like the 5-star players, I would say Guillard, Fisher, Atisogbe. Atisogbe, yes, his pace, well, he burns Billy Proctor, doesn't he? He gets a bit
Mm.
of space. And then I thought Guyton was going to go all the way as well. But it just shows how, said this before
The
on this podcast,
ridiculous
how
tackle, Bowden
quick
Barrett.
Bowden
I
Barrett
know.
is just amazing, isn't it?
He did it
Um,
twice. He did it again as well. So later in the
yeah.
game, ridiculous player.
Um, but because Guyton's not slow.
No.
Um, those were kind of I thought Atisogbe defensively was that it was the bit like the way he covers the space, his kicking game. Um, France did win the aerial battle. I think they weren't 100% squeaky clean, but Atisogbe, Villiers, Spring were the better aerial threats and better at disrupting and getting the ball back for France. The kind of 4-star players, as it were, I think, as kind of the next rung down. I'd say I had Barlow, I thought was really good. We know he's a nuts and bolts player, great work rate, like line out work really well. And then I'd go for guys off the bench. Van Tonder and Woki, I thought were really good. Van
Mm.
Tonder obviously nearly has the dream debut where he like just nearly streaks in from 20 from the
Burst through.
22. But I thought, you know, the physicality when we saw him at Cast, he was just banging people. They needed that physicality from Van Tonder, and they missed it as soon as he got injured. Perpignan, and like the some of the physicality, the hits, I thought was huge and exactly what you want off the bench. And same from Woki. I think he brought a physicality and a bit of dynamism. Like we looked at that. You said that the pack lacked a bit of dynamism, but I think they had a lot off the bench,
Yeah.
and it came to bear. I know Talfa Vanua knocks it on at the end, but he kind of to bring his physicality as well, his ball carrying. I think he's someone in the past. I can't remember. It might have been Sean Edwards said that he's the best impact sub in world rugby. I guess RG Snyman's probably got a bit to say about that, but it's a similar role, isn't it? Like just a massive bloke. He's going to come on, carry hard, and offload out of nowhere. So I think they did bring but I would call out Van Tonder and
Yeah,
Woki as the
definitely.
kind of best guys off the bench. Conversely, I'd say the kind of the 1 star almost off the bench, I'd say was as in 1 star out of five was Baptiste Junot, who cocked up a couple of kicks, which I think,
Huffed a few out on the floor, didn't they?
which he didn't have loads of impact. We didn't see as much of his spark, but also just the ones he did knob out on the full were pretty basic ones, to be
Bit
honest.
frustrating. Yeah, at a time when they were under relentless pressure as well. Just,
Yeah.
just here we go. Yeah, not his finest few minutes. Yeah, no builds on that. I think I'd agree wholeheartedly. I just think
Anyone else? Anyone else you want to call out, or any other thing you want to call out?
no, not really. More that it just sets up the. I think it kind of sets up the series in perhaps a slightly more intriguing way. It felt before going in, so much noise around like the France side, either they're going to get hammered or it's disrespectful. And actually, one of the people who went hardest on the them bringing a weakened side was Justin Marshall. But even he flagged that he didn't think it meant it was going to be an absolute cruising.
Yeah,
He
yeah.
was, yeah, it was very much like they've got. It was more the premise and what it means for fans as opposed to it means France going to be crap, which I
Which
don't
I
think is
think is our that ultimate
entirely
was
unfair.
our view, wasn't it? It's like
Yeah,
we know this team is very good, but it'd be really cool to see the
full
full
crack.
noise and for the hype of the series to have, you know, to have a Thomas Ramos and
Yeah,
guys like
but
that.
I think almost, slightly ironically though, this result feels like it almost adds a bit more intrigue because beforehand I was thinking this is like it's a win-win for France because no one's expecting anything. It's a bit of a lose-lose for the All Blacks because you'd be like, well, asterisk, it's French's or the French B team, whatever you want to call it. I think now you're in a position where actually the storyline is can France back it up and prove that there are guys here that can be pushing the first team, short and long term. And for New Zealand, it's well, it felt like they left some points out there to put it bluntly, and the carrot for trying to put daylight between the two sides, I think is actually really significant. So I think it's in a slightly odd way, it's actually set up the series perhaps slightly better than I thought at the start of the game.
I thought two of the tries were pretty
They were
harshly.
the ruled out tries were very much on the marginal spectrum.
I think it was someone that at one point said, I think it was Jeff Wilson, was like, "This is not Super Rugby. It's everything's got to be, there's plenty of eyes on it, or like, the technical stuff has got to be really scrutinized." And I was like, I mean, it's just refereeing, isn't it? Like, you either let that go or you don't. I
Yeah,
think the
the
obstruction one is lenient,
instruction.
and then I think the having seen it again, I think the knock on one is also quite like live. That only gets called back because it's on super slow mo and someone's chucked it up on screen and it's very marginal. Like the one where he like supposedly lose it over the line. Like
Oh yeah, it just
Anything other
looks like
than
a
slow
try,
mo
doesn't
is a
it?
try. Yeah.
Yeah.
That said, I still think the Villiers. I think to get a yellow for that, I think is harsh. The not because
Where it was on the
his
pitch.
yeah halfway line and his arm is moving backwards. Like I know the ball goes forward and it's going and his arm is moving down, but he's trying to drag it backwards. Like he's not just volleyballing it forward. I still, yeah, I mean, you said last week that
The
those get
obstruction,
over penalised.
perhaps, yeah. The obstruction one was when they were showing it. I'll be honest with you, it was like it's going to be when the ref turns around and says, "No, we need the replay from like a phase earlier or a phase later." Like it's just I know what's his name is in front, but he barely touches him, and the two of them have basically stopped running and just sort of almost give each other a little hug. Van Tonder is totally given up because he's never ever going. It was just I just thought it was quite funny, given they'd been
Yeah,
disallowed just before as well. You're like, oh my god, this is. At that point, I also
former
thought, oh
pro.
my,
I love how like as a former pro rugby player, Nick Berry's like using slightly technical language. Like he's like, yeah, well, he would push out and then they
yeah,
fold round or like, you know,
prevents him
um,
pushing out. It's like,
yeah.
mate, he is pushing nowhere. My only last comment on this was we spoke about in the under 20s how useful it was having Oliver Cowie to provide the post-match analysis and interviews in a very kind of RP British way. Well, Tyler De Gouy, long may he have a long, successful French career. One, because very erudite after the game, but more importantly, just so I don't know why, but having a guy with such a thick Canadian accent sounded like after a college football game. It was absolutely incredible on the sort of Sky, the New Zealand Sky coverage. Yeah, it was so good.
I the player we do need is Guyton. Like his English is well Croydon's finest. He's fluent in English, and I think his English accent is pretty spot on. I think, but I didn't see that interview.
It's
What do
brilliant.
you just very very quickly? I think it'll be like 30-point victory next week.
Yeah, so do I.
What changes are you expecting, and what changes would you make?
For
Because I think,
France,
yeah, I think I know what I would want to do.
I don't know if I'd bring in one of. I don't think either second row was particularly impressive. I think
I
I'd
don't,
probably
I
be
don't think
looking
I've
at.
seen anything from Degree. I think the line out ran well, and therefore Oradu can get like he did very well at line out time. I saw him around the park a bit more.
I thought he was
I would
pretty
like to
anonymous.
see. Yeah, they're both pretty anonymous, and I think Degree's been pretty anonymous in both games, to be honest.
One of
Um,
Woki or Tafafanua. I mean, I don't
I
think
would,
Tafafanua is going to start, so I'd probably bring Woki into the second
I
row.
no, I would bring Waki at 8, and I'd put Guillard at second row.
Okay.
Just, I think he's a slightly bigger. He's a tight head lock, isn't he? So I'd put him, and then you've got another ball carrier as well, which is what they need and a bit more dynamism. It doesn't hurt the line out at all, bringing in Cameron Waki. I think that's pretty much it. I kind of thought about maybe bringing in Telfafinu as well, but yeah, no, I'd be happy with that. I don't think I would change Gaiton. I think defensively, I
No,
don't think are they able to play Deporter? Is he available
I
next
actually
week,
don't know.
or is it only the third test that they're available? Because well, I guess the man in possession is Barassi, and I don't think he is any less harem scarum
Mm,
defensively. I think he's more harem scarum. I think the best defender of the three, Barassi, Gaiton, and Deporter, I think is Deporter. But I wonder if they kind of want to develop the Fiku Gaiton partnership.
yeah,
But I think
yeah, I
they're
can
going to
see
get
that.
dicked.
I don't know what it is for when those guys come in as well, because I guess who else was in there?
Boshaton,
There's no
Bastion
because
Verne. Bastion Verne's there to carry the bags, isn't he, really?
there's no Gazzotti, is there? He was injured because that's
Yeah.
the sort of player, if available, I think
Yeah.
I would like to see
Certainly on
come
the
in.
bench. Yeah, because if you moved Guillard up and had Walkie starting,
Mm,
you could bring him off the bench as a second as a ball carrier, couldn't you?
yeah. Okay. Well, looking forward to it. Should be a spicy one, regardless. I'm sure France. I feel like they'll know that they'll need to be a bit more rounded and better because I think New Zealand were rusty but also impressive in parts. So
Yeah.
should be an intriguing affair.